The tray hit the floor with a metallic crash. "Watch where you're standing," Nurse Denise Carter snapped, her voice cutting through the busy hallway like a blade. Every head turned. Patients on gurneys, a janitor mopping near the nurse's station, 2 interns holding charts. All of them froze for a second and looked at the new nurse standing there, gloves still on, face calm. "I'm sorry," Sarah Coleman said quietly, already bending down to pick up the scattered supplies. "Sorry doesn't fix a contaminated tray," Denise muttered, loud enough for the whole hallway to hear. "Honestly, where did they even find you? You've been here 2 weeks and you still don't know where the crash cart supplies go." A young intern smirked. Another nurse rolled her eyes and whispered something to her colleague behind a clipboard. Sarah said nothing. She knelt down, gathered the fallen gauze packets one by one, placed them back on the tray, and stood up straight. "I'll restock it," she said simply and walked away. No one in that hallway knew she had once pulled a bleeding soldier out of a burning vehicle under gunfire. No one knew her hands, the same hands shaking slightly from exhaustion after a double shift, had once held a dying man's artery closed with 2 fingers for 11 minutes straight in a place with no lights, no monitors, and no backup. They just saw a quiet, new nurse who dropped a tray. They were about to find out how wrong they were. Set up Riverside General Hospital sat at the edge of a mid-sized city, the kind of hospital that saw everything: car accidents, heart attacks, gunshot wounds, overdoses, and everyday flu cases all under one roof. The ER was always loud. Machines beeped. Phones rang. Doctors called out orders. Families cried in the waiting room. It was controlled chaos, every single day. Sarah Coleman had started there 3 weeks ago. She was 34 years old, average height, dark blonde hair always pulled back into a tight bun, and calm brown eyes that rarely showed emotion. She moved efficiently, spoke only when necessary, and never volunteered information about herself. To her co-workers, that made her strange. Suspicious even. "She barely talks," one nurse had said in the break room during Sarah's first week. "She's probably just shy," another replied. "Or she doesn't know what she's doing and doesn't want anyone to notice," Denise Carter had said, stirring her coffee with a smug little smile. Denise had been a nurse at Riverside for almost 15 years. She ran the ER floor like her personal kingdom, and she did not like when someone new came in and didn't immediately defer to her. What none of them knew, what Sarah had not told anyone, was that 6 months ago, she had been a sergeant in the United States Army. A 68 w combat medic specialist. She had served 2 deployments overseas, spent years training under some of the most demanding trauma conditions imaginable, and had personally saved the lives of dozens of soldiers in situations most civilian doctors would never even train for. She hadn't told anyone because she didn't want special treatment. She didn't want people looking at her differently, asking her 100 questions about war, or treating her like some kind of hero. She just wanted to work quietly, help people, start a new chapter of her life after years of chaos and loss. But quiet in a place like Riverside ER was often mistaken for weak. "New girl," Dr. Preston Wade said one morning, barely glancing up from his tablet as he walked past her station. He was the senior attending physician on the floor, early 40s, sharp suits under his white coat, a reputation for being brilliant and equally arrogant. "Try not to slow us down today. We had 3 codes yesterday, and I don't have time to babysit." "Understood, doctor," Sarah replied evenly. He didn't even wait for her response. He was already halfway down the hall, calling out for a chart. Sarah exhaled slowly and went back to prepping her station. She had learned a long time ago that some people needed to see it before they believed it. Words didn't change minds. Actions did. She had all the patience in the world. She had survived worse than cold stares and dismissive comments. Still, the small moments added up. When she suggested a faster way to triage a patient with chest pain, Denise cut her off mid-sentence. When she asked to assist on a trauma case, the attending physician assigned her to restocking supplies instead. When a patient specifically thanked her for staying calm during a panic attack, another nurse said, "Anyone could have done that." Sarah kept her head down. She clocked in, she worked hard, she clocked out. At night, she went home to a small apartment with bare walls, a single photo on the nightstand of her old unit, 6 young men and women in desert fatigues, arms around each other, smiling despite everything. 2 of those faces were no longer living. She never talked about that either. Her supervisor, nurse manager Angela Ruiz, had noticed something different about Sarah from the beginning. A stillness in her that other new hires didn't have. Angela had reviewed Sarah's personnel file when she was hired, and there had been a brief note about prior military medical service, but Sarah had asked, during her interview, that her military background not be publicized or treated as a talking point. "I just want to be evaluated on my current work," Sarah had said. "Not my past." Angela had respected that. But watching her team treat this clearly skilled, clearly composed woman like an incompetent rookie was starting to wear on her patience too. "You know she was a medic in the army, right?" Angela mentioned once, almost casually, to Denise in the staff room. Denise waved a hand dismissively. "So what?"
Combat médic nurse.
"Different training completely. Probably just knows how to slap on a bandage and call it a day." Angela didn't argue further. She simply thought quietly, "You have no idea what's coming." There were smaller moments too, moments that never made it into any conversation, but stayed with Sarah longer than she admitted. Like the day a frightened elderly patient gripped her hand so tightly during an IV insertion that her knuckles went white. And Sarah simply held on, talking softly, telling her about nothing in particular. The weather, an old recipe, anything to keep her mind away from the needle, until the woman finally exhaled and smiled. "You have a gift," the woman had said. "Such a calm way about you." "Thank you," Sarah had replied, and for a moment, just a moment, she'd felt like maybe she belonged there. Then an hour later, she'd walked past the nurse's station and heard Denise telling another colleague, "I don't get why administration hired her without more of an interview. She barely says 2 words. How do we even know she's qualified?" Sarah kept walking. She didn't let it show on her face. But some nights, lying awake in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, she wondered if she'd made the wrong choice, leaving behind the structure and clarity of military life for a world where competence didn't always speak for itself, where people needed comfort and small talk and constant reassurance just to trust you. She thought about her old team leader, Staff Sergeant Diaz, a broad-shouldered man with a booming laugh who used to say, "Coleman, you could defuse a firefight with that face of yours. Never seen anyone so calm while everything's falling apart." She missed that kind of trust. The kind earned in seconds, under fire, where nobody had time to question your credentials because your actions spoke faster than any resume ever could. Here at Riverside, she was starting from zero. And some days that felt heavier than she wanted to admit. Rising tension a few days before everything changed, there had been a smaller incident. One that, in hindsight, should have told everyone exactly who Sarah Coleman was, if only they'd been paying attention. An elderly man had come into the ER complaining of dizziness and a strange, dull pain in his jaw. Denise had taken his vitals, glanced at the chart, and moved on to the next patient without much urgency. "Probably just anxiety," she'd said to a resident. "He seems fine." Sarah, passing by with a stack of supplies, had paused near the man's bed. Something about the way he sat, one hand pressed lightly against his chest, sweat beading faintly at his hairline despite the cool room, pulled at her attention. "Sir," she said gently, setting down the supplies. "Can you describe the pain in your jaw again? Does it come and go, or is it constant?" "Comes and goes," the man said, his voice a little breathless. "Feels like pressure. My wife made me come in. I told her I was fine." "Have you had any nausea?" "Cold sweats." "A little," he admitted. "Thought it was just nerves." Sarah's expression didn't change, but her hands moved quickly, pressing the call button for a nurse to grab an EKG cart. "I want to run a quick heart tracing, just to be safe," she said calmly, keeping her voice light so as not to alarm him. Denise, walking past, frowned. "He's already been triaged as stable, Coleman. We've got actual emergencies waiting." A typical MI presentation in elderly patients doesn't always show up as classic chest pain, Sarah said quietly, already hooking. Denise rolled her eyes but didn't stop her. 90 seconds later, the EKG printed out, and Sarah's calm expression flickered, just barely, as she scanned the jagged lines. ST elevation clear as day. "He's having a heart attack," she said, no longer soft, no longer hesitant. Cath lab now. Page cardiology immediately. The room shifted instantly into motion. Within 20 minutes, the man was in the catheterization lab, a blocked artery being cleared before it could cause irreversible damage. The cardiologist later told Angela that another 30 minutes of delay could have cost him his life. Nobody made a big deal about it afterward. Denise mumbled something about being glad it worked out. And the moment passed, folded quietly into the noise of another busy shift. But Angela noticed. She always noticed. And she began keeping a quiet mental list of every small, unglamorous moment where Sarah's instincts had proven sharper than anyone gave her credit for. Sarah, for her part, said nothing about it to anyone. She simply moved on to her next patient, because that was what you did. You didn't wait for applause. You just kept working, kept watching, kept catching the things other people missed, because somewhere in the back of her mind, a lesson from years ago never quite faded. The patient who looks fine is sometimes the one closest to dying. Never stop looking. The night that changed everything started like any other Tuesday shift, steady but manageable. Sarah had just finished discharging a patient with a minor laceration when the overhead radio crackled to life. Multiple vehicle collision inbound, ETA 4 minutes. 3 patients, 1 critical, pediatric involved. The entire ER shifted gears instantly. Nurses moved fast. Trauma bays were prepped. Dr. Wade strode out from his office, adjusting his stethoscope, calling out assignments. Carter, Bay 1. Rodriguez, Bay 2. Coleman, he paused, glancing at Sarah. Restock and support only. Stay out of the critical bay. Sarah nodded without protest, though something in her chest tightened. She had handled far worse than car accidents in far worse conditions. But she said nothing. She moved to her assigned position and waited. The ambulance doors burst open 2 minutes later. Paramedics wheeled in gurneys fast, shouting vitals, trading information with the trauma team in rapid bursts. Adult male, blunt force trauma, BP dropping, possible internal bleeding. Adult female, fractured femur, stable but in shock. Pediatric 6 years old, chest injury, struggling to breathe, oxygen sat at 88 and falling. That last one made every nurse in earshot go pale for half a second. A 6-year-old with a collapsing oxygen level was every ER's worst nightmare. Dr. Wade rushed toward the child's gurney. Denise followed close behind. The little boy, pale, terrified, blood on his shirt, was gasping, his small chest rising and falling in short, panicked bursts. Get me a chest X-ray now. Dr. Wade barked. Someone prep for possible chest tube. The boy's oxygen levels kept dropping. 86. 84. 82. He's tensioning, a resident shouted, panic creeping into his voice. Trachea shifting. The room erupted into controlled panic. The specific kind of panic that happens when trained professionals realize a patient is dying in front of them and time is the enemy. We need a chest tube kit now. Where's the kit? Dr. Wade shouted. Radiology's backed up. X-ray's gonna take 6-7 minutes, someone called out. We don't have 6 minutes. Wade snapped. From the edge of the room, near the supply cart, Sarah's eyes had already locked onto the boy's chest. She had seen this before. Not in a hospital. In the field. A tension pneumothorax, where air builds up in the chest cavity, collapsing the lung, pushing on the heart, cutting off blood flow. Without immediate decompression, the child would go into cardiac arrest within minutes. She had treated this exact injury on a 22-year-old private with a piece of shrapnel in his chest, in the back of a moving vehicle, with nothing but a 14-gauge needle, and her own steady hands. She didn't wait to be asked. Dr. Wade, she said, stepping forward, voice calm but firm. That's a tension pneumothorax. He needs needle decompression immediately. Second intercostal space, midclavicular line. There's no time for imaging. The room went quiet for half a second. Dr. Wade turned, staring at her like she'd spoken out of turn in the middle of surgery. Excuse me. His trachea is deviating, his oxygen is crashing, and his breath sounds are absent on the right side, Sarah continued, already moving toward the supply cart, pulling a large bore needle from a sealed pack. This isn't something imaging is going to fix in time. He needs decompression now, or he arrests. I did not ask for your medical opinion, Wade said sharply. though there was a flicker of uncertainty behind his eyes. "You're a nurse. Step back." "Sir, with respect, I've seen this exact injury before," Sarah said, her tone never rising, never wavering. "In combat. I've performed this procedure under far worse conditions than this. If we wait for imaging, this child does not survive the wait." Denise scoffed audibly from across the bay. "Doctor, she doesn't even work trauma normally, she's on supply." "SATs at 78. The monitor technician called out, voice sharp with alarm. The boy's lips were turning a faint shade of blue. His small body was fighting for air that wasn't coming. Dr. Wade's jaw tightened. Every second of hesitation was a second closer to a child dying on his table. He looked at the monitor. He looked at the boy. He looked, finally, at Sarah, standing there, needle in hand, completely steady, completely certain. 75, the tech called. "Do it," Wade said suddenly, stepping back half a step. "Coleman, do it. Now." Sarah didn't hesitate. She moved to the boy's right side, located the space between the second and third ribs with practiced fingers, wiped the site in one clean motion, and inserted the needle in a single, controlled movement. There was a soft hiss of escaping air. The monitor, which had been screaming a low, dropping tone, suddenly steadied. SATs climbing, 79, 82, 85. The boy's chest, which had been rigid and struggling, suddenly loosened. His breathing, though still shallow, became rhythmic instead of desperate. Color began returning to his small lips. 89, the tech said, disbelief evident in his voice. 91. The room was silent except for the beeping of the monitor. Steady now, climbing alive. Dr. Wade stared at the boy, then at Sarah, then back at the monitor. His hands, which had been braced on the gurney rail, slowly relaxed. "Get radiology down here for a confirmatory film and prep for a chest tube placement to follow up," Sarah said calmly, stepping back to give the trauma team room. "He's stabilized for now, but he'll need it properly sealed." For a moment nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Denise stood frozen near the foot of the bed. Her earlier scoff still hanging awkwardly in the air, completely out of place now. Dr. Wade looked at Sarah for a long moment. "Where," he said slowly, "did you learn to do that?" Sarah peeled off her gloves, tossing them into the medical waste bin with quiet efficiency. "I'll explain later, doctor. Right now you have 2 more patients in the other bays." She turned and walked out of the trauma bay, leaving behind a room full of stunned faces and a small boy whose chest was now rising and falling with steady, even breaths. But the tension in the ER didn't dissolve. If anything, it thickened. Whispers spread through the hallways within minutes. "Did you see that? Who is she? How did she know that?" Some were impressed. Others, especially Denise, felt something closer to humiliation, and humiliation, in people like her, often turned into resentment rather than respect. "She got lucky," Denise muttered later in the break room, arms crossed. "One good guess doesn't make her some kind of expert." But even as she said it, her voice lacked its usual confidence. Because deep down, she had seen it too, the complete absence of hesitation in Sarah's hands. That wasn't a guess. That was muscle memory. That was someone who had done this before, many times, under conditions far worse than a busy Tuesday night ER. And later that same night, the situation would escalate into something none of them were prepared for. Something that would force the truth into the open for good. The turning point, it was almost 2 a.m. when the second wave hit. A gas explosion at an apartment complex 4 blocks from the hospital sent a surge of casualties toward Riverside within minutes. The scanner crackled with numbers that made even veteran staff go still. 12 confirmed injured, at least 4 critical, more incoming, fire department still pulling people from the rubble. "All hands to the ER now." Angela Ruiz's voice rang out over the intercom, sharp with urgency. "Mass casualty protocol, everyone report to your stations." The hospital transformed within minutes. Hallways that had been quiet moments earlier became a storm of movement. Gurneys wheeled in one after another, sirens still echoing faintly from outside. Smoke and dust clinging to the clothes of paramedics rushing through the doors. Sarah was already moving before the second alert even finished sounding. She grabbed a trauma kit, tied back a loose strand of hair, and positioned herself at the triage entrance without being told to. Old instincts, older than her 3 weeks at Riverside, took over completely. Coleman, supply station like before. A resident called out, still following the earlier assignment sheet. No time for that, Sarah said, not unkindly, but with an authority that made the resident pause. I'm triaging incoming patients. Someone needs to sort critical from stable before they even reach the bays. Or we lose people in the hallway. Dr. Wade, sprinting past with a chart in hand, caught the exchange and this time didn't argue. Do it, he said simply and kept moving. The first patient through the doors was a middle-aged man, soot-covered, coughing violently, a piece of debris embedded in his shoulder. Sarah assessed him in seconds. Breathing labored but present, bleeding controlled, alert and oriented. Yellow tag, Bay 4, she called out, already moving to the next gurney. A woman, unconscious, burns along one arm, breathing shallow but present. Red tag, Trauma Bay 2 now, Sarah shouted. And 2 nurses rushed the gurney past her. Then came a young firefighter, barely conscious, brought in not by ambulance but carried directly by 2 of his colleagues, faces white with fear. Blood soaked through the front of his uniform. His breathing was rapid, shallow, wet-sounding. He went back in for a kid, one of the firefighters said, voice cracking. Ceiling came down on him. Something's wrong with his chest, he can't breathe right. Sarah's hands moved instantly, cutting through the fabric of his uniform, exposing a chest wound that told her everything she needed to know in half a second. A sucking chest wound. Air being pulled directly into the pleural space with every desperate breath he took. Each inhale making a wet, hollow sound that no one in that hallway would ever forget. Occlusive dressing now, she called out and without waiting, grabbed the nearest sterile plastic wrapping herself, sealing 3 sides of the wound in one smooth, practiced motion, leaving the 4th side open to release trapped air. A technique so specific, so exact, that only someone who had done it dozens of times before could execute it that fast, under that much pressure. Get him to trauma 1. He needs a chest tube immediately. Tell them I said penetrating chest trauma with suspected pneumothorax. Right side stat. The firefighter's eyes fluttered, unfocused, his breathing still labored but no longer worsening at the same terrifying rate. His colleague, gripping the gurney rail with white knuckles, looked at Sarah like she had just performed a miracle. Will he, the firefighter's partner stammered. He has a chance now, Sarah said. Her voice steady even as her hands continued working. Get him moving. The gurney disappeared down the hallway toward Trauma Bay 1. And Sarah was already turning to the next incoming patient before she even had time to process what had just happened. For the next 40 minutes, it continued like this. Patient after patient, decision after decision, Sarah's voice cutting through chaos with calm, exact instructions. Green, yellow, red. Stable, urgent, critical. She moved through the hallway like she had done this 100 times before. Because she had, just not in a hospital hallway with fluorescent lights and clean floors. She had done this in dirt, in heat, in the back of vehicles under fire, where hesitation meant death and speed meant survival. Dr. Wade, moving between trauma bays himself, began noticing something strange. Every single patient Sarah tagged, every single call she made under pressure, was correct. Not close. Not mostly right. Exactly, precisely correct. The kind of clinical accuracy that took years, sometimes decades, to develop. By the time the wave of casualties slowed, nearly 90 minutes later, the ER staff stood in a stunned kind of exhausted silence. 12 patients had come through those doors in states of chaos and fear. All 12 were alive, stabilized, moving toward recovery. Angela Ruiz walked the length of the hallway, taking stock, checking on her team. When she found Sarah near the supply station, quietly restocking trauma kits, her hands trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was beginning to fade. Sarah, Angela said softly. Sarah looked up, her composed mask slipping just slightly, exhaustion visible now in the lines around her eyes. You saved that firefighter's life tonight, Angela said. You saved that little boy's life earlier. You made triage calls in 90 seconds that most doctors would take 5 minutes to make, and you were right every single time. Sarah didn't answer immediately. Her eyes drifted just for a second, somewhere far away, somewhere none of them could see. I've done this before, she finally said quietly. Just not here. From behind them, Dr. Wade's voice cut in. quieter now than it had been all night, stripped of its usual sharp edge. "Nurse Coleman," he said, "I think it's time you told us who you really are." The hallway had gone quiet. Denise stood near the nurse's station. Arms no longer crossed defensively, her earlier hostility replaced by something closer to shame. Other staff members, drawn by the stillness in the air, had gathered nearby without quite realizing they were doing it. Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her. Faces that 3 hours ago had doubted her, dismissed her, mocked her quietly behind clipboards and coffee cups. Faces that now looked at her with something entirely different. She took a slow breath. "My name is Sarah Coleman," she began, her voice steady but softer than usual. "But for 6 years, most people called me Sergeant Coleman. I served in the United States Army as a 68 Whiskey, a combat medic specialist." A murmur rippled through the small crowd. "I did 2 deployments," she continued. "One to Afghanistan, one to a classified operational area I still can't fully discuss. I was attached to an infantry unit. My job was simple, on paper. Keep soldiers alive when everything around us was trying to make sure they didn't survive." She paused, her eyes drifting toward the floor for a moment before lifting again, steady. "I've treated gunshot wounds in the back of moving vehicles. I've done field amputations with nothing but a med kit and someone holding a flashlight. I've kept a man alive for 40 minutes with 2 fingers pressed against a severed artery because we couldn't get him to proper surgical care in time." Her voice didn't waver, but something in it carried the weight of memory. "I've lost people too. Good people. People I trained with, people I laughed with the night before, people who didn't make it home." The hallway was silent except for the distant beeping of monitors down the corridor. "When I came back," Sarah continued, "I didn't want to be treated like some kind of war hero. I didn't want people asking me 100 questions, or looking at me differently, or expecting me to have some dramatic story ready every time someone made small talk. I just wanted to help people the way I knew how, without carrying my past into every conversation." She looked directly at Denise now, not with anger, but with quiet honesty. "I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone here. I just wanted to do my job." Denise's face had gone pale. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out at first. Dr. Wade stepped forward slowly. "You performed a needle decompression on a 6-year-old tonight without a second of hesitation," he said quietly. "You sealed a sucking chest wound in under 10 seconds. You triaged 12 mass casualty patients with better accuracy than half the residents I've trained." He shook his head slowly, something like disbelief and respect mixing in his expression. "I told you to stay out of the critical bay tonight." "I know," Sarah said simply. "You should have told someone," he said, though there was no real anger in it anymore. "You should have told me." "Would it have mattered?" Sarah asked, not accusatory, just honest. "Or would I have just become the war nurse, instead of being evaluated on my actual work?" Wade didn't have an immediate answer to that, because he knew deep down that the question was fair. Angela stepped in gently, sensing the weight settling over the hallway. "Why don't we get the rest of the team to breathe for a minute?" she said. "It's been a long night. Sarah, can you sit with me for a bit?" Sarah nodded, and the two of them walked toward the small break room at the end of the corridor, leaving the rest of the staff to slowly disperse, murmuring quietly amongst themselves, glancing back every so often at the woman they thought they'd understood after 3 short weeks. Inside the break room, the overhead lights hummed faintly. Sarah sat down heavily, the adrenaline of the night finally beginning to drain from her body, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that came from more than just physical exertion. Angela poured 2 cups of coffee and set one down in front of her. "You don't have to say anything else tonight if you don't want to," Angela said gently. "I just didn't want you sitting alone after all that." Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm cup, staring down at it for a long moment. "It's strange," she said quietly. "Tonight was the first time since I got out that I felt like myself again. Fully. Not holding back, not pretending I don't know things I know. It felt good. And it also felt terrifying, because I wasn't sure how people would react." "They reacted the way they should have reacted from the beginning," Angela said. "With respect." Sarah let out a small, tired laugh. "Give it time. Respect earned in one night can fade fast if I make a mistake next week. Maybe, Angela said. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think what happened tonight cracks something open. Not just about you, but about how this whole team operates. We got comfortable assuming we already knew everything about the people we work with. That's dangerous in a job like this. Sarah nodded slowly, finally taking a sip of the coffee. Can I tell you something I haven't told anyone here? Of course. The little boy tonight, Sarah said, her voice quieter now. For a second, when I saw him on that gurney, struggling to breathe, I saw someone else. A soldier I treated years ago, same kind of injury, different circumstances entirely. He was 20 years old. Scared out of his mind, but he kept apologizing to me the whole time. Like he was inconveniencing me by getting hurt. Her eyes glistened faintly under the fluorescent light. He made it. But it was close. Closer than tonight, honestly. And for just a second, treating that little boy, I was back there. Same fear. Same urgency. Just a different battlefield. Angela reached over and placed a hand gently over Sarah's. Thank you for trusting me with that. I don't usually talk about it, Sarah admitted. It's easier not to. But maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe carrying it all in silence isn't actually strength. Maybe it's just another kind of hiding. The two women sat quietly for a while after that, the noise of the ER settling into its usual late-night hum outside the door, the adrenaline of the crisis slowly giving way to something calmer, more reflective. It was, in its own quiet way, the true turning point. Not just the moment Sarah's skill had been revealed to the room, but the moment she allowed herself to be seen, fully, without flinching away from it. The reveal and recognition word spread through Riverside General Hospital fast. Faster than any hospital gossip Denise had ever witnessed in her 15 years there. By the time morning shift arrived, nearly everyone had heard some version of the story. The new nurse. The quiet one. The one who saved a 6-year-old's life with a needle and steady hands. The one who sealed a firefighter's chest wound in the middle of chaos like she'd done it 100 times before. Because she had. Angela Ruiz called a small meeting later that morning. Not a formal review, just a gathering of the core ER staff in the break room, coffee cups in hand, exhaustion still heavy in the room from the long night. Sarah sat near the back, quieter than usual, unsure of what to expect. I want to say something, Angela began, standing at the front of the room. Last night, this department handled a mass casualty event with 0 fatalities. 12 patients. 0 fatalities. That doesn't happen by luck. That happens because every single person in this room did their job. And one person in this room did her job better than any of us expected, because none of us bothered to actually ask who she was before we decided who she wasn't. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Denise stared down into her coffee cup. Sergeant Sarah Coleman, Angela continued, served 6 years as a combat medic in the United States Army. 2 combat deployments. She has field experience the rest of us, myself included, will likely never have to draw on in our entire careers. And for 3 weeks, this team treated her like she didn't know how to do her job. The room was silent. Somewhere down the hall, a coffee machine hissed and gurgled. Dr. Wade cleared his throat. I owe you an apology, Nurse Coleman, he said, standing slightly straighter than usual, his usual confidence replaced by something more careful. I dismissed your assessment last night before I even considered it. If you hadn't spoken up when you did, that boy could have died waiting on an X-ray. I let my assumptions get in the way of good medicine, and that's on me. Sarah nodded slowly. Thank you, doctor. I appreciate you saying that. Denise finally looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, her usual sharp confidence completely absent. Sarah, she said, voice quieter than anyone in the room had ever heard it. I said some things to you. About the tray. About you not knowing where supplies went. I made you feel small in front of everyone, more than once, and I did it because... Honestly, I don't even have a good reason. I just decided you weren't good enough before I gave you a real chance. Sarah looked at her for a long moment. There was no satisfaction in her expression, no quiet triumph at watching someone eat their words. Just tiredness, and something like understanding. I've been underestimated before, Sarah said. In basic training, I was the smallest person in my platoon. Grown men twice my size told me I wouldn't last 2 weeks. In my first deployment, some of the infantry guys didn't want a woman as their medic. Didn't think I could keep up. Didn't think I could handle what we were about to walk into. She paused. I learned a long time ago that I don't need people to believe in me before I do the work. I just need to do the work. Eventually, the ones worth keeping around figure it out. Denise's throat visibly tightened. I'm sorry, she said, and this time, the words weren't performative or forced. They were simple and real. I judged you before I knew a single thing about you. That wasn't fair, and it wasn't right. I accept that, Sarah said quietly. Thank you. For a moment, the room stayed quiet, the kind of silence that comes after something honest has finally been said out loud. Then one of the younger residents, a soft-spoken man named Kevin who had barely said 2 words to Sarah in 3 weeks, spoke up hesitantly. Can I ask what it was like, he said. Over there, I mean. I've never met anyone who actually did what you did. Sarah considered the question. She wasn't used to being asked so directly, without pity or morbid curiosity, just genuine interest. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, she said slowly. And also, in a strange way, the most meaningful. You learn to make decisions in seconds that most people spend hours agonizing over. You learn that fear doesn't go away. You just learn to work through it, because the person in front of you needs your hands steady, not your mind calm. The calm comes later, if it comes at all. Did you ever lose someone you couldn't save? Kevin asked quietly. The room seemed to hold its breath. Sarah's eyes dropped for a moment before lifting again. Yes, she said simply. More than once. You carry those. You don't get to put them down, not really. You just learn to keep walking with the weight of them. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Then Angela gently redirected. I think that's enough for today, she said. Sarah doesn't owe us her whole story, and we should be grateful for what she's already shared. Sarah gave her a small, appreciative nod. Later that day, as the story continued circulating through the hospital, more details began to surface. Not from Sarah herself, who remained as private as ever, but from an old service record that Angela, with Sarah's permission this time, shared briefly with hospital administration for recognition purposes. Sergeant Sarah Coleman had received a Bronze Star for actions during her second deployment, for treating and stabilizing 4 wounded soldiers during an ambush that lasted over 3 hours. All while under direct enemy fire, refusing to leave any of them behind despite being wounded herself in the process. She had a Purple Heart from a separate incident nearly a year earlier. A piece of shrapnel injury she rarely spoke about. The same injury that had left a small scar along her collarbone that she always kept covered beneath her scrubs. She had trained combat medics fresh out of basic, taught them how to keep their hands steady when the world around them was falling apart. She had been offered a promotion to instruct permanently at a military training facility stateside, safer, more stable, more prestigious, and turned it down because she felt she still had more to give in the field. And when her contract ended, she had chosen nursing school instead of returning to a battlefield. Because after years of trying to save lives in the worst conditions imaginable, she wanted to try saving them somewhere quieter. Somewhere she could maybe, finally breathe. I didn't want a title, Sarah explained later that evening to Angela. The two of them sitting quietly in Angela's office after the shift ended. I didn't want people looking at me like I was fragile because of what I went through, or like I was some kind of legend because of what I did. I just wanted to be normal. Do good work. Go home. Sleep. Not have people ask me if I've ever killed anyone, or if I have nightmares, or any of that. Do you? Angela asked gently. Have nightmares? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Sometimes, she admitted. Not as often as before. It's gotten better. Angela nodded, not pushing further. For what it's worth, she said, this hospital is lucky to have you. I mean that. Not because of your medals or your service record. Because of how you handled last night. Because of how calm you were with that little boy's parents when they finally arrived, crying terrified. Because of how you didn't say a single word about your background even after saving multiple lives, until someone finally had the decency to ask. Sarah gave a small, tired smile. The first genuine smile Angela had seen from her since she started. Thank you, she said quietly. That actually means a lot. The following week, hospital administration held a brief, informal recognition. Nothing extravagant, no press, no cameras, exactly as Sarah had requested. Just the ER staff, gathered in the break room once more, Angela presenting a small plaque acknowledging Sarah's actions during the mass casualty event, alongside a card signed by nearly every member of the department, including Denise and Dr. Wade. The little boy's parents, hearing about what had happened, insisted on visiting personally before their son's discharge. His mother, tears streaming down her face, hugged Sarah tightly in the hallway outside his room. "Thank you," she whispered, voice breaking. "Thank you for knowing exactly what to do. Thank you for not hesitating." Sarah, momentarily caught off guard by the embrace, softened, hugging her back gently. "He's a strong kid," she said. "He did the hard part. I just knew what to look for." The boy himself, still weak but recovering well, looked up at Sarah from his hospital bed with wide, curious eyes. "Are you like a superhero?" he asked, voice small but earnest. Sarah laughed softly, a real laugh, warm and unguarded. "No," she said, kneeling down to his eye level. "I'm just someone who learned how to help people when things get scary. That's all." "That sounds like a superhero to me," the boy said simply, and Sarah's eyes, for just a moment, glistened with something she hadn't let herself feel in a very long time. Emotional resolution. Weeks passed. The hospital settled back into its normal rhythm, busy, chaotic, full of the everyday emergencies that defined life in an ER. But something had shifted, quietly and permanently, in how the staff at Riverside General treated Sarah Coleman. She was no longer the new nurse who dropped a tray. She was Sarah, steady, sharp, endlessly capable, someone junior nurses now actively sought out for guidance during difficult cases. Denise, in particular, had changed the most. The sharp edges she once wore like armor had softened, replaced by something closer to genuine respect and eventually friendship. "Can I ask you something?" Denise said one slow afternoon. The two of them restocking supplies together in the same storage room where the tray had once crashed to the floor weeks earlier. "Sure," Sarah said, not looking up from the shelf she was organizing. "Why didn't you just tell everyone from the start? About your service, I mean. It would have saved you a lot of grief." Sarah considered the question for a moment. "Because I didn't want to be treated well because of my past," she said finally. "I wanted to be treated well because of my present. Because of the work I do right now, today, not because of a uniform I used to wear." She paused, glancing at Denise. "I know that probably sounds stubborn." "It sounds like integrity," Denise said quietly. "Something I could probably use more of." Sarah smiled slightly. "You've changed a lot these past few weeks, you know." Denise let out a small, self-deprecating laugh. "Yeah, well, getting humbled by a war hero tends to do that to a person." "I'm not a hero," Sarah said more seriously now. "I just did what I was trained to do, when it mattered. Same as you do here every single day. Same as everyone on this floor does. We just did it in different places." Denise studied her for a moment. "You lost people over there, didn't you? I could see it, that night, when you were talking about it." Sarah's expression grew quieter, more distant. "Two of my closest friends," she said softly. "One during my second deployment. One a year after we both came home. He struggled with what he'd been through, more than I realized at the time. I still think about both of them, almost every day." "I'm sorry," Denise said, and this time, there was no performance in it at all, just quiet, honest sympathy. "Thank you," Sarah said. "It's part of why I do this now. Nursing, I mean. It doesn't erase what happened, but it helps. Every patient I help here feels like, I don't know, like it matters. Like it's worth something, even after everything." Denise reached over and, somewhat awkwardly, placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "For what it's worth, I'm really glad you're here. And I mean that as your colleague, not just because of what you did that night." "I appreciate that," Sarah said, and she meant it. Dr. Wade's relationship with Sarah shifted as well, though in a quieter, more professional way. He began consulting her more often on trauma cases, valuing her field experience in ways he never would have considered before that night. During one particularly difficult case a few weeks later, a construction worker with a severe crush injury, Wade turned to Sarah without hesitation. Coleman, what's your read on this? Sarah, without missing a beat, gave her assessment, and Wade adjusted his treatment plan accordingly. It had become natural between them, this new dynamic, earned respect built not on rank or title, but on demonstrated skill and trust. One evening, near the end of a long shift, Angela found Sarah sitting alone in the break room, staring at the small photograph she kept in her locker. The one of her old unit, 6 young soldiers, arms around each other, smiling in the desert heat. You okay? Angela asked gently, sitting down across from her. Sarah nodded slowly. Yeah. Just thinking about them. My unit. It's been a while since I let myself really think about it, honestly. Does it get easier? Angela asked. Talking about it, I mean. Now that people here know? Sarah considered the question carefully. A little, she admitted. I think I spent so long trying to keep that part of my life separate from this one. Like they couldn't exist in the same space. But maybe they can. Maybe I don't have to hide it to protect it. Angela smiled softly. For what it's worth, this whole department is proud to have you. Not just because of what you did during that mass casualty event. Because of who you are, every single day since. Sarah looked down at the photograph one more time, then gently closed the locker door. Thank you, she said quietly. That means more than you know. A few weeks after that quiet conversation in the break room, Sarah received an unexpected letter in the mail, forwarded from her old unit's family readiness group. It was from the mother of the young soldier she'd stabilized during that ambush years ago. The one who had earned her the Bronze Star. The woman had somehow tracked down her current address through a mutual contact, wanting to thank her, years later, for giving her son the chance to come home and grow old. Sarah read the letter 3 times that evening, sitting alone at her kitchen table, tears finally falling freely in a way she rarely allowed herself. It wasn't grief this time. It was something closer to release, a quiet confirmation that everything she had sacrificed, everything she still carried, had mattered. That it continued to matter, even now, in a hospital hallway thousands of miles and years removed from where it had all started. She taped the letter inside her locker, right next to the photograph of her old unit. And from that day on, whenever a shift got hard, whenever a case reminded her too much of the past, she would glance at it for just a moment and remember why she kept choosing this work, again and again, even when it cost her something. That night, walking out to her car after her shift ended, Sarah paused for a moment under the parking lot lights, looking back at the hospital. Its windows lit up warm against the darkening sky, the quiet hum of a place that never really slept. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was carrying her past like a weight she had to hide. She felt like she was finally allowed to set it down, gently, and let it simply be part of who she was. Not something to prove, not something to hide, just something that had shaped her into exactly the kind of nurse this hospital and these patients needed. Powerful ending months later. A new nurse started at Riverside General Hospital. Young, quiet, clearly nervous on her first day, unsure of herself in the loud, fast-moving chaos of the ER floor. Sarah noticed her standing awkwardly near the supply station, watching everyone else move with practiced confidence while she hesitated, unsure where to even begin. Sarah walked over, offering a small, genuine smile. First day, she asked. The young nurse nodded, clearly relieved someone had approached her. Is it always this hectic? Pretty much, Sarah said with a light laugh. But you'll get the hang of it. Everyone starts somewhere. I heard people talking about you, the young nurse admitted shyly. They said you used to be in the army, a combat medic or something. Is that true? Sarah paused for a moment, then nodded simply. It is. That's incredible, the young nurse said, eyes wide with admiration. Sarah shook her head gently. It's just a part of my story, she said. What matters more is what you do right here, right now, for the people who need you. That's where the real work happens. That's where it counts. The young nurse smiled, some of the nervous tension easing from her shoulders. Thanks, she said softly. I needed to hear that. Sarah gave her shoulder a light, reassuring pat before turning back toward her own station, ready for whatever the shift had in store next. Because in the end, it was never about medals or titles, or the uniform she used to wear. It was about showing up. Every single day. Steady hands, quiet strength, and a heart that never stopped choosing to save people. No matter where the battlefield happened to be.